Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to be talking to you all about empowering youth, co-creating programs with teams. Next slide, please. Okay, so to get us started, my name is Pearl Ennie, and I'm an educator at the Smithsonian. I started off at the Anacostia Community Museum, and I'm currently at the National Museum of American History. I'll pass it off to Maureen.
Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Maureen Leary, and I am the Youth and Family Programs Manager at the Smithsonian National Postal Museum. Next slide, please.
Okay, so here are our museums. As I mentioned, I started off at the Anacostia Community Museum, and it was founded in 1967 by John Kennard as the original African American History and Culture Museum located in the neighborhood of Anacostia. And yeah, it's currently under directorship of Dr. Melanie Adams. And Maureen will probably touch on this, but one cool thing about both of our museums is that they are two of the units that are not located on the National Mall. So they're smaller and so very wonderful. So we encourage y'all to come and visit. Maureen.
Yeah, so I am, as I said, from the National Postal Museum, and we are also located off the mall. We are on Capitol Hill in a building from 1914 that was originally built to be the main post office for Washington, D.C. And we've been open for 31 years, and we grew out of a collection that was housed at the National Museum of American History, and then we got our own building 31 years ago. So at the Postal Museum, we explore all aspects of postal history, which includes mail, mail delivery, postage stamps, postal workers, vehicles, systems, and processes, all those things that move the mail. And our mission is that through the preservation and interpretation of our postal and philatelic collections, the Postal Museum will educate, challenge, and inspire its audiences on the breadth of American experiences. Next slide, please. This session was originally conceived to also include the National Museum of American History and the Youth Leadership Team Project, which Pearl and I have both been part of. Unfortunately, our colleague who has been leading that project is unable to be with us today, but we wanted to mention that it has been a really rewarding experience that we have worked on together, and that we are highly anticipating the National Youth Summit to be held virtually from September 17th through the 24th. The youth leadership team with teens around the country helped to plan the summit. And I hope that there will be an opportunity for the audience to hear more about that project at some point in the future. In the meantime, I encourage you to learn more about the summit at the link that should be provided in the chat. And as I mentioned that about the chat, I also want to let you know that we do have a chat moderator who is keeping an eye on things for us, and we welcome you to put any questions or comments you have in the chat throughout the presentation, and we will do our best to respond to them. Thank you. Next slide, please.
All right. So getting into our session goals, I first want to talk about this cute little picture on the slide. As Maureen mentioned, we got to work together on the youth leadership team. And so when we got to visit some of our students, we discovered our mutual love of Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So we got matching magnets from a cute store in Corning, New York when we were visiting our students at the Rockwell Museum. So that's a fun photo there. And so, yeah, in this session, we want to do 4 things. And you'll see that each of the 4 sections will be prompted by a title card with a question to kind of prompt conversation and invite you all to co-create this experience with us. So our first objective is to explore youth co-creation of pilot programs. So both Maureen and I's programs were pilots. We want to discuss strategies for youth empowerment. So that's the core of this presentation and what really drives us in our work. We want to reflect on the role of community partnerships. We could not have done either of these programs without our community partners, so we really want to highlight them. And then finally, we want to learn about our challenges and impacts. So that'll wrap us up. Next slide, please.
So before we begin sharing specifics about the programs that we have led, we'd like to take a moment to ask the audience, what does co-creation mean to you? We might all have slightly different versions of what co-creation with youth looks like, and we'd love to hear what you consider to be the key components. And as you are putting your thoughts on that into the chat, I will hand it over to Pearl to start us off by describing one of her programs. So next slide, please.
Thank you, Maureen. Okay, so when I was first brought onto the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum, I was invited to direct the Anacostia Park Oral History Project. This program ran from September 10th to December 10th of 2022. And this project was the vision of Katrina Lashley, who wrote this work, I believe in 2017 or 2018, and it was funded by the National Park Service. And so, of course, between that time, we all experienced COVID, which shifted the timeline a little bit, but she brought me on in 2022 to direct this project. And this picture that you see on the left was on September 10th when we went to Anacostia Park, right by the little fishing dock. If you're familiar with the park, it's the section of the Anacostia River right in front of the roller skating pavilion. So we were over there meeting with friends of Anacostia Park, pictured in the front with their t-shirts, Mr. Bruce and Mr. Bobby. And yeah, we got to run into a group of really, really generous and loving seniors from the Washington Seniors Wellness Center. So this encounter really shaped the entire trajectory of the project. And yeah, it quite quickly became an intergenerational project. You know, the idea was for high school students ages 14 to 18 to be in conversation with community members who live near and around Anacostia Park and could speak to their experiences in this particular time. So, you know, through the process of partnerships, which we'll get to later, our 8 high school students got to be in conversation with community members ages 19 to 92 throughout the course of this work. And yeah, our students came from high schools all over the DC metro area. And yeah, it was truly a labor of love getting to direct this project and build partnerships and really speak into our youth. The photo you see on the right is a screenshot of the finished product, which is a 28-minute video that includes the 12 interviews conducted by our 8 students. And the video itself opens up with a short video taken from that same September 10th with the elders, and then it includes photographs from our students, our 2 photographers we hired to photograph this project. I took some photos as well. And yeah, it was truly a collaborative effort. And as we move throughout this presentation, I'll get to share more about yeah, who all was a part of it. But yeah, that's our high level overview. Thank you. Next slide.
All right, so I'd love to tell you about the Youth Stamp Collective, which I ran at the Postal Museum, which we will sometimes refer to as NPM for short. But before I do that, I want to call out a few things that we are seeing in the chat. Thank you all for your input. Some great ideas about what co-creation means. And so seeing some thoughts about shared authority, supporting youth agency, bringing teens in from the very beginning, which I also agree with is really key to do that as much as you can, or having them involved in as many steps as possible as you move through your program. Exchange of ideas, student voice and choice. I love that way of phrasing it. Breaking down hierarchies. And I think this is a great point too. Co-creation means if we disagree, we don't move forward until we have reached agreement. There is struggle together. I think that struggle piece of it is also really key. It's messy, right? It's messy, but it's also beautiful. So, okay. So the Youth Stamp Collective was a program I ran at the Postal Museum, and it ran for 5 months, and it was designed to teach high school students about how stamp topics are selected and to work with them on developing and submitting their own suggestions for new stamp design. So we spent a bit of time learning about the Citizens Stamp Advisory Committee, which I will often refer to as CSAC by its initials. So this is a group of content experts selected by the United States Postal Service, the USPS, and they meet 4 times a year to consider proposals from the public for new stamps. And each year, the committee submits several dozen recommendations to the Postmaster General, who is the person in charge of the entire postal system. And the Postmaster General then gets the final say on which ones will actually become stamps. And USPS does put out about 3 dozen designs each year. And there are some guidelines for that. Stamp topics must be American or American related. They must be positive. They must be on an important topic, and they must be popular with the general public. So there's obviously some subjectivity to this, but it definitely helps narrow things down somewhat for this group, which has a huge job to do. They get tens of thousands of submissions every year that they have to look through to make a selection of just several dozen. So the students learned all about that process. They also learned a lot about the Postal Service in general and the exhibits and collections that are stewarded by the Postal Museum. The students were all part of a special education program at Theodore Roosevelt Senior High School in Washington, D.C. And they had a wide range of educational needs due to each of them experiencing some type of physical and or intellectual disability. Next slide, please.
Okay, so we're shifting to our second goal, and prompted by this question where we want to hear from you all. What are your tips for collaborating with teams? Yeah, Maureen and I will be sharing some of our experiences with that, but yeah, we invite you all to share in the chat your tips. Next slide, please. Okay, so sharing more about the Anacostia Park Oral History Project, and when you see ACM in parentheses, that stands for Anacostia Community Museum. There were multiple people involved in educating the teens throughout this project. So we brought on Benji de la Piedra, who is an oral historian, to teach our students how to conduct interviews. And so what you see pictured here are 9 photos that I took of 9 interviews of our students. The left 4 were taken at Anacostia Park, right around that same section by the roller skating pavilion, and then the middle and then middle photo and then the right 4 were taken at Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens. So that was one of the skills that our students were taught and got to practice throughout this project. And then we also taught them how to take photographs. And so I brought on Daryl Todd to teach them how to take photos. And that took place at Anacostia Park outside. the angles, lighting. And so these are kind of the concrete skills that our students got to have throughout this project. And um, we also, in addition to these 9, there's a total of 12 people that were interviewed. So the other 3 came from the Washington Senior Wellness Center, and that was those group of our senior citizens in the original slide I showed you all on the left. And those interviews took place at ACM in our library and some of the office spaces up there. And so those were more intimate and private and were not photographed, but at least you get to see where we spent time. In addition, this project was funded by National Park Service, so we did partner with 2 rangers to give tours of Anacostia Park as well as Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens. And one fun thing is actually Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens is part of Anacostia Park, so that's kind of neat. But yeah, we partnered with Ranger Stephanie at Anacostia Park and then Ranger Remy at Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, who kindly gave brief overview of those park spaces to our students. And then, yeah, at our next section, we'll be getting into partnerships so I can elaborate a little bit more. But this is some of the activities that our high school participants got to engage in. Thank you. Next slide.
All right. So before I get into this, I do just want to take a moment to again call out some of these comments we're getting in the chat. Thank you all so much for your input. It really is a value add to the session to hear from all of you. And there's some wonderful ideas coming through in the chat. So I encourage you to read the chat if you haven't been reading it. But yes, some ideas, taking the time to build relationships and trust. And absolutely, I think I failed to mention our program for the USTM Collective was weekly. So the students did end up coming to me 18 times. So it was quite significant, the amount of time they ended up spending at the museum and on this project. And not to be quick to assume we're right just because we're older. Amen to that. I learned as much from them as they learned from me, I think, most of the time. Be humble and actively listen, give up power, which is so hard to do. Try to understand their point of view. Meet them literally where they are. Feed them. I love that one. And we always talk about that at the museum about you got to have food if you're going to have teens. My group they were with me at lunchtime, but they brought lunches from school. So that was also a nice sort of social time for them to have that lunchtime together. So thank you for those comments in the chat. Keep them coming. We love to hear from you. And as I said, I hope you all are looking at it and reading each other's comments. So for the USTM Collective, the kind of activities we did consisted of 2 core components. So we had classroom activities and we also had gallery or museum experiences. And when I say classroom, I mean the classroom we have at the museum. Although there were some related activities that occurred in their school classroom as well when I was not with them. But mostly we did sort of classroom stuff at the museum. So for that component, we explored some background on the Postal Service, what postage stamps are for. It's always kind of surprising, I think, to adults that kids don't necessarily understand what postage stamps are. And you have to explain how they're used, why you have to pay for them, all of that. So that was sort of like starting at a very base level about that. And then we talked about what kinds of things appear on stamps, how topics are selected, and how the public can participate in this. So the students worked collaboratively to research, present, and vote on stamp topic ideas. They chose 2 main topics, and then they developed proposals for them. And then they ultimately presented these proposals to a large group of classmates, school faculty, museum staff, and family members in a closing celebration. Throughout that whole process, the whole learning research process, we also explored the museum galleries in depth and considered how museums impart information to the visitor. So because they came so many times to the museum,
It looks like Maureen froze on my end. Paul, does it look like that for you? Should I? Yeah. Okay. Our apologies. It looks like Maureen's um, dropped out, check stuff. So I will proceed to the next slide. Um, okay, thank you all. Welcome back, Maureen. Um, okay, so I hope anyway we heard a bunch from that, but there's more to discuss in this section. So we'll just move on for time's sake. Um, so empowering youth agency, which is what Maureen and I are super excited to talk about. And I can weave in some of you all's input about collaborating with teams. So someone mentioned um, asking them for their input. And that was huge for us. On the photo on the left, you can see community guidelines that we came up with together as a collective. And really, you know, I feel like directing this project, I wore many hats. And a lot of it was community building, as I mentioned, but also was facilitator. So I invited the students to come up with these guidelines themselves and actually write them up on this whiteboard. And this took place at the library at the Anacostia Community Museum. So you see the different handwritings because all 8 of them added something. And, it was a building consensus activity because, you know, part of my role as facilitator would ask, okay, does that resonate with you all? If not, how can we modify a word or two in there to make sure that it's something that folks are comfortable with? And to another person's comment, which was building a safe and welcoming environment, we really did want to co-create, if you will, a safe and welcoming environment. So these were the guidelines that we came up together with during session 2. And to Maureen's point about the frequency, we did meet nearly every other Saturday. So I believe it was 10 sessions total. 10 was just the number, right? September 10th to December 10th, and we met for 10 sessions. So, of course, the first one was at Anacostia Park. We're really orienting our students to the space. And then workshop 2 was really diving into what do we want this experience to be. Then on the right, you see pictured is uh, the student showcase, which took place on December 10th at Martha's Table, which was born out of a partnership with 2 friends of mine now, Sean and Erica, where we decided, which, mind you, is right around the corner from Anacostia Community Museum. So it was really important to keep that spirit of John Kennard, the founder of ACM, very much working within community to then do the showcase. And Martha's Table, which will share more, will be featured in the partnership section of this presentation, focuses on food and education and a lot of programming within the community. And to further orient you all, if you're not already aware that Anacostia is located in Ward 8. It's also known as an area called East of the River. And it's a very beautiful community. When I was working at ACM, I was also living in Anacostia. So this was my world and my life. And so um, yeah, who you see in the audience there were folks who were involved in the presentation. Of course, invited the family and friends of all the students and the interviewees, as well as friends of the project. And They were there to really cheer and support our students, and I wanted the students to make sure they had a red carpet experience. For many of them, that was their first time speaking on a panel, and so I wanted them to feel as supported as possible to really use their voice. Um, and yeah, like many folks in the comments said, really to meet them where they are. And so we got nice little high chairs so they could be front and center. So, we of course played the video and then had a little Q&A session where the students could speak about their experience in the project, how they grew, and to somebody in the comment who said their dreams, to really speak about their dreams and how this project may have shaped that. So yeah, that is Empowering Youth Agency with the Anacostia Park Rural History Project. I'll pass it on to Maureen now. Next slide, please.
Great. Thank you, Pearl. So yeah, we've seen so many great comments about tips for this, for doing this kind of work, empowering youth agency, and this was really important to us for this program that we did. We wanted students to really feel that ownership over the topics that they ended up selecting and researching. And so once they learned the basic parameters of what can go on a stamp, we started brainstorming ideas under different categories. So you can see here a little snippet of a Padlet that we had going to brainstorm. And the nice thing about using the Padlet is we worked on it together when they were at the museum, but they also could add ideas to it at school. They could talk to their teacher, in any moment at school if they thought of something and add it to the Padlet. So it was a nice sort of connection between us during the times when we weren't actually physically together. And we generated a ton of ideas. This was just, like I said, a little snippet of this Padlet. And so then it took, it was quite a process going from this huge list down to just a couple of ideas. But we had the students work in groups together, and they had to, together decide how to narrow down, to one idea. And then we had, I think, 4 small groups, and then they presented the ideas to each other, and then they had to vote on just 2. So we decided we were just going to end up creating 2 proposals that they would work on in 2 small groups. So they really had to take charge of that. How are we going to sell our idea to the other students, and see if ours can be the one that was selected. And so that was a fun exercise for them. And as you can see on this slide, the 2 ideas they settled on were go-go music and the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. So it was a little hard for us to tell because all of us are in the DC area. We're not really sure if go-go music has the level of popularity required outside the DC region, but it certainly is a big part of the identity of DC. And for these kids, they felt like it was really worth putting on a postage stamp, or maybe a series of stamps. And for the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, that was a really interesting topic they picked too, because certainly Martin Luther King Jr. has been on stamps before, but the actual memorial has not. So I thought that was really interesting that they picked that specifically, and most really of the major memorials and monuments on the National Mall do appear on postage stamps. So this is certainly a very appropriate topic for a stamp. And we do have the 100th anniversary of Martin Luther King's birth coming up in 5 years. So it's good timing to have a stamp come out for that in a few years. And it's certainly a topic that I think the committee would find worth considering. So these were 2 really great, interesting topics that they picked. And then they were split into 2 groups to develop these proposals. And they had to figure out how to include a justification for how their idea fit all 4 of those required components that I mentioned earlier. And we really distilled those into one word for each of the 4 to help them remember. So it has to be American, has to be important, has to be popular, and has to be positive. So those were those 4 components that they had to keep in mind and had to write out, how does our stamp topic idea fit those 4 areas. And then they also includes proposed artwork. So Artwork is not generally included in a submission to the Citizen Stamp Advisory Committee, but we thought it was really a nice way for the students to have a more visual representation of their work for themselves and also to share when they presented. And it was also a nice way to tap into the art and design skills. That's maybe some students maybe either wanted to work on building those skills, or some students had those skills and they wanted to showcase them. So they had the freedom to use basic art materials, but we also encouraged them to branch out into digital platforms like Canva to create design. So they worked so hard on these proposals, and it was just such a really proud day when they finished them all up and they presented everything to this big audience at our closing celebration. And then we went to the post office together. Luckily, we have a post office in the Postal Museum. We went to the post office together and mailed their proposals, and it was a really emotional moment for all of us. And I think they truly did feel ownership of all of that from start to finish, and that was wonderful to feel like we were able to provide that experience for them. All right, next slide, please. So as Pearl mentioned earlier, the partnerships that we had in building these programs were critical to the success that we were able to achieve. So we'd like to hear from you. How do you partner with organizations in your community? And we will now talk about how we did that. So next slide, please.
Hey, thank you, Maureen. It's interesting thinking about how many people were involved in this work. I mean, at every stage, what you see here is, I want to mention actually where the students came from. And they came from 6 high schools. 2 were at the School Without Walls, and 2 were at Roosevelt, which is actually the same school that Maureen partnered with for the Youth Stamp Collective. So that was also a fun connection point between these 2 projects. But yes, the rest came from Anacostia High School, the Excel Center, Baloo, Bishop McNamara, and I believe, yes, that's all of them. Excitingly, I actually got to go to the student who was at Baloo, his high school graduation a couple of weeks ago, and he's off to college this fall. So, these relationships certainly last beyond the time. That's a promise I made to them at the student showcase. Some of the kids, there's a meme that's like, prepare to be sick of me. I told them that. And so it's just been a joy and an honor to have partnered with these institutions and with the people that came from them. So that's the high school side. And then critical were these 3 organizations where our community members came from. So the Friends of Anacostia Park was critical. Akima Price, she really got this organization up and running and is who we credit for the success of connecting folks, her and her team, who really, really love Anacostia Park and are so eager to share and bring people into that space. And so they were lovely partners, 4 of whom generously agreed to be interviewed by our students. The Washington Senior Wellness Center, Ms. Evelyn Miner, was an amazing person to partner with and make sure that our seniors were transported safely to and from the Anacostia Community Museum for that day. And, shout out to the shuttle drivers and the equipment used to, physically transport our seniors and keep them safe and well. And then with our friends of Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, we had Mr. Lean, who is the resident at Eastland Gardens and who is central to connecting us with the 5 folks who agreed to be interviewed by our students. So again, could not have had those 12 community members involved without key people across the way, really facilitating those relationships. And then I did mention Martha's Table as our host for the Student Showcase on December 10th, 2022. And you know what? Somebody did mention keeping us fed, the children fed. And so we did partner with a local organization, Monty Catering, who fed us at each of those 10 meetings. And then actually, so 8, because our first one was cookout style from the Friends of Anacostia Park at the park. And then our last one actually was at Monty Catering as well. And then Martha's Table provided produce for everyone to take home for free in these beautiful bags that were designed by students in the community in partnership with Lidl, local grocery store that opened up in Skyland, DC. So, wow, I feel like there's so much more to say on partnerships. So I really hope that gives y'all a sense of just how many people were involved in making the Anacostia Park Oral History Project a success. And please allow me to say one more thing. So the video, so we worked with Shannon to actually piece that. That's a whole skill, video editing. And so I learned a lot from her and got to kind of put that together. But I have to mention that our students, so each of those interviews, were transcribed. And so I printed out the actual words of the interview and had them highlight which parts. Okay, important context. These interviews lasted from 30 minutes or so to like 75 minutes. So this is a ton of content. And as a reminder, the video that's on the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum's YouTube page is 28 minutes. So we had to scale that down a little bit. And that, again, to one of y'all's comments about asking for student input, that was critical. So they shared which snippets of those interviews they wanted to be featured. And so we had a whole session doing that. And so by the time that we had that student showcase and shared that video with the community, that was their work. They did the interviews. They, decided what parts of the interviews they wanted to showcase. And so, yes, that's what I wanted to add there. Okay, thank you. Next slide.
All right. Well, I didn't have quite as many partners as Pearl did. That is a lot of balls to keep in the air. But yeah, we did this program did consist of 4 partners. And before I go into that, I do, again, just want to shout out the chat. We have some great ideas coming in from our audience about different organizations to partner with. We're seeing libraries, senior centers, a school, especially one that's located in close proximity. National park rangers are mentioned. So yeah, I'm getting some great ideas from the comments in the chat. So thank you all so much for your input. So for this program, for the Youth Stamp Collective, it was really 2 very active partners, and then we had one that was a little bit more in the background, but it was the students were from Roosevelt High School, as I had mentioned earlier, and they were brought in by School Talk, which was our other main partner. So the partnerships really were key to the success of this program. So it all started because my neighbor and good friend is the executive director of School Talk, and that organization is an organization in DC that advocates and provides programming for local youth with disabilities. So my friend and I had been talking for ages about how we should really figure out a way to partner on a program. Wouldn't that be great? And finally, we started with a 6-week pilot program last summer that was really all about exploring museum careers. So it's a little different than what we did with the Youth Stamp Collective, but it was a nice way to just sort of jumpstart something with them and just kind of explore this idea a little bit of partnering. And so then once that relationship was established, it was pretty easy to expand the partnership and create the Youth Stamp Collective program. And School Talk really made it all so much easier for me by tapping into their relationships across DC public schools and identifying a school that was interested in participating, which was, of course, Roosevelt. And it just eased the process so much. And the staff at Roosevelt High School were wonderful too. They were all in on making time during the school day to give the kids this experience, just really prioritizing this for them. And I never heard one word about, oh, but they're losing instructional time. They really recognized that this was a really important educational experience for the kids in many different ways, and they supported it 100%. So that was great. All the staff involved from School Talk and from Roosevelt and from the museum, we all held meetings every other week to make sure everything was on track. It was really a big commitment on all sides. And I would say it was really a very successful partnership. We really relied on the knowledge from the partners on both how to work with the kids with disabilities, because this was a new area for me. Certainly I've done programs where I've interacted with kids with disabilities, but to have a program that was such a big component of it was new for me. So I had quite a bit to learn, and the School Talk staff were great with that. And of course the staff from the school were providing really critical information about how to meet the needs of each individual student. And the final partner we had was the Rehabilitative Services Administration in DC. And as I said, they were a little bit more in the background, but they were important too, because they helped with logistics for meeting some of the legal requirements for the student participation. This was technically structured as a work placement for them. And so they received credit for being in that kind of work program because although they were not, getting paid by the museum or doing a defined job, they were gaining workplace skills by coming to a workplace and kind of seeing how it functioned and participating in this program. So all of those partners were really important. And I think, Pearl agrees, these programs just would not have been able to get off the ground and be the successes that they were without having partners that were just really, bought in all the way and there for us. So next slide, please.
All right. Before I transition to this question, I did want to shout out Maureen because I did get to go to her showcase for the Youth Stamp Collective at the National Postal Museum. And it was so beautiful to see those relationships and those partnerships exemplified and embodied, and especially the enthusiasm of the parents of the students who you could tell were just beaming with pride about, just their children being able to blossom over the course of Maureen's program. So thank you for inviting me to witness that. Okay, so this next question, which is, our transition to the fourth and final session goal here, which is to talk about our challenges and impacts of our programs. So can you share with us, what do you consider to be highs and lows of youth co-creation? And this question is kind of fun because one of the ways the invitation questions are kind of icebreakers that we often do with our children is like, what are your highs and lows of the day? So we kind of spun that for this question. So do please share in the chat, and Maureen and I will be able to touch on that as you share with us. Next slide, please. So for the Anacostia Park Oral History Project, some challenges were certainly in the paperwork. I think with teams just in general, it's very necessary to do a lot of follow-ups to make sure that paperwork and things get turned around. But then also on the Smithsonian side, there's a lot of levels of, just processing that needs to happen, whether that be, for, working with minors, so training that we need to do. getting permission forms from parents and caregivers or guardians, get those signed and returned back to us, making sure that we had, emergency contact infos, any kind of dietary restrictions, etc. So that was all paperwork, and all that needed to be returned in order for the students to stay in the program, all the way through payment. This was a project where the students were absolutely paid to participate in the program. So that involves paperwork as well, making sure that bank accounts are set up, etc. Communication tools, also a challenge. Gen Z has a lot of exposure to a lot more communication tools than certainly I did when I was their age. And email was not, and I understand it's not the main one, but we at the Smithsonian don't yet have an approved, maybe one of these like group messaging apps to necessarily use to truly meet our students where they are. And so I said, not yet. So, that's potentially in the works, but email was our go-to. And so I know in my directorship of this program, I got creative with staying in the loop with the students' parents and kind of contacting them as a way to reach the students. So that was challenges, yes, but overcome through creativity. Impacts, I did mention the interviewing and photography skills that the students got to gain through this program. And again, another beautiful thing about this project is that, 6 different high schools were involved. So it was an opportunity for the students to learn and together alongside with and build relationships across local high schools and opportunities to practice public speaking. So on the photo on the right is from the Anacostia River Festival, where 4 of our 8 students came to speak and share about their project, and that was a paid opportunity for them. And then, and that was in addition to, of course, this panel from the Student Showcase. And then the photo at the top there is one of the tours that we had, and get to name more partners from the actual Anacostia Community Museum who are activators. They're a powerhouse of educators who, 2 of whom gave a tour to our students of the Utopia project, which was the exhibit at the time at Anacostia Community Museum. So yeah, challenges and impacts. I'll pass on to Maureen. Thank you. Next slide.
Okay, we are just about out of time, but I will try to go through very quickly. So I mentioned this Roosevelt staff were great in helping me understand the students' needs, but we also did have to be really mindful of student confidentiality. So they couldn't really give me full details, and I kind of had to work some of this out for myself as we went along. So we did, have a big kind of wide range of abilities and things. So I was constantly trying to balance how we spent our time and how we interacted with other museum staff and all that kind of thing. That was, those are a couple really, really big challenges. And I would say I had mixed success with planning activities, but it definitely improved as time went on. And I was really happy to see some concrete impacts from this program. After, 5 months and 18 visits, they felt really at home at the Postal Museum, felt like it was a place for them. And also a big piece was part of what happened outside of the program when they were traveling to and from school, which they called travel training. And it might sound trivial to just get from point A to point B, but this was really an important life skill for these kids to gain the confidence to navigate the DC Metro system on their own. It was a really proud moment for me when the Roosevelt teacher who came with the students each time told me that one of the kids was going to take the Metro by himself for the first time. And he was nervous to do it, but he was okay because he practiced so much by coming to the museum. So they definitely gained some life skills and some academic skills through this program, and the growth of the partnerships was also really important. It can feel really daunting to see collaborations outside of the Smithsonian because of all the logistics involved, but these partners made it really easy. And so it was truly wonderful. So I know we are out of time. If we can go to the next slide, please. We did get some questions, and they're lovely questions, and I don't want to try to rush through them. So I will just ask you to please feel free to reach out to us with our email addresses with any follow-up you would like to do with us on these topics. We'd be more than happy to chat. We wish we could chat more right now, but I know we're on a tight schedule with this summit. So please take note of our email addresses. Please reach out, and thank you to the audience. Thank you so much for your participation. It really made the session very interesting and interactive and valuable to hear from all of you about your experiences in this area. So thank you very much, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the summit.